The Suwannee River is one of the last great unspoiled rivers in the southeast. Its waters drain a land area of more than 11,000 square miles. Coming up, we'll explore some of the highlights of the Suwannee River watershed and show you some great ways to experience its waters and wildlife.
Funding for Georgia Outdoors has been made possible by a grant from Mary Hall Singleton and by the Imlay Foundation.
For almost 266 miles, the mighty Suwannee River winds across a wild and diverse landscape. From its origins in the Okefenoke Swamp to the river's end along the marshes of the Gulf Coast, this great river is one of the last remaining unspoiled waterways in the United States. But a river does not stand alone. The Suwannee River drains an area of over 11,000 square miles, straddling Georgia and Florida. This is the Suwannee River watershed, a network of springs, creeks, and underground aquifers which feed this great river. Our tour of the watershed begins where the river itself is born, in the Okefenoke Swamp.
Okefenoke really is a complex of different wetland systems. The eastern Okefenoke is more of a bogland system. The eastern swamp also has the more open vistas, the fire-created prairie areas. The western swamp is the region of the swamp to which the Okefenoke waters drain primarily. The Suwannee is born in the peat bogs of the Okefenoke Swamp.
Peat is a semi-solid mass of decaying vegetation. As water filters through this mass, the tannins released by this plant matter dye the water black, like tea. This black water, which is actually clean enough to drink, feeds the Suwannee River. Peat is also unsteady when walked on. In fact, the word Okefenoke is a Native American name, meaning the land of the trembling earth. This swamp, stretching across 600 square miles, is one of Georgia's most visited natural wonders, attracting about 400,000 visitors a year from across the globe. There are 3 points of access to the Okefenoke: Stephen C. Foster State Park to the west, Okefenoke Swamp Park to the north, and the National Wildlife Refuge entrance on the east side. This is where you'll find Okefenoke Adventures, an outfitter and guide service run by Joy and Chip Campbell.
Okefenoke Adventures is sort of like the gateway to getting out there in the swamp. We offer guided boat tours, guided interpretive boat tours. Our guides are naturalists and they really know a lot about the cultural history and the natural history of the swamp.
But they'll eat birds, they'll eat turtles. Push comes to shove, they'll eat another gator.
Out here we have a man-made canal that was dug in the late 1800s in an effort to actually drain the swamp. That effort failed, and so what we have now is this long canal that just goes through the prairies of the swamp. I think the first thing people expect to see certainly are alligators. But I think what surprises them the most is just how beautiful it is. People have this idea that swamps are smelly and dark and dank and really mysterious, but it's really not. The Okefenoke is just, it's bright, it's open, there's sunshine. There's nothing ominous about it. I think they're really surprised by just the sheer beauty of the whole thing.
On the west side of the refuge, Stephen C. Foster State Park is the gateway to the swamp. Built in the 1950s, Stephen C. Foster has been a popular Okefenoke getaway for half a century. The park is named for composer Stephen C. Foster, and though he never actually saw the Suwannee itself, Foster made the river world famous by composing the lines, "Way down upon the Suwannee River."
Stephen Foster State Park is 17 miles outside of Fargo. It's more to the interior of the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge as opposed to the other accesses which are on the perimeter. At Stephen Foster State Park we have camping, cottages, a boat basin where we have people able to launch their private boats, as well as boat rentals. And then we do boat tours 3 times a day at 10, 1, and 3, which are all very popular. The location is unique because what a lot of people don't realize is that long 17-mile drive into the state park, they're actually into the swamp interior. So when they get out there and then get into a boat and go out, they're not on the perimeter of the swamp, they're already in the middle. And they're quickly in a cypress forest that you would have to travel on in to get that dense from the other locations.
The landscape on the west side of the swamp is very different from the open peat bog prairies of the east side. This is where the Suwannee River begins to take shape, among the cypress-lined creeks of the western Okefenokee. A major draw for visitors to the Okefenokee is the wildlife. One creature in particular draws a lot of attention.
No question that a large number of the people who visit the Okefenokee, one of the things that they want to see are the alligators. Okefenokee is one of the major populations of American alligator we have. Experts don't agree on exactly what the population number is. You see estimates ranging from 8,000 up to 30,000. You see a lot of times just floating. A lot of times you just see their head. You know, the eye bumps and the nose bump up and squared off at the back of their head, and they can drop under and hardly make a ripple. They're just wonderfully adapted for the life they lead.
Native only to the southeastern U.S., the American alligator is one of only 2 species of alligator in the world. Though they can grow to lengths of up to 19 feet, the average size of a full-grown adult is 13 to 14 feet, the largest reptile in North America. Due to overhunting, alligator populations were once so low it was feared the species would never recover.
The alligators back in the early 1900s were depleted. They were depleted as a result of unregulated market hunting and loss of habitat. It was about 1967 when they were listed as endangered, and what the endangered status provided them was protection. It took about 20 years for alligator numbers to rebound, and about 1987 they were actually delisted.
The current population of American alligator in Georgia is so healthy, a limited hunting season was opened in 2003. Other than man, the alligator has no natural predators. It's considered the top of the food chain in areas like the Okefenokee. Though these large reptiles aren't known to attack humans, it's a good idea to keep your distance and never feed the alligators.
People inevitably want to feed that alligator to get a little bit closer for a picture. And when they feed those animals, they become conditioned and want to be fed by every human. And particularly with the alligator, that's not so good, because here he's coming up to every boat, he's coming for a handout, and they're thinking he's being vicious.
Over 50 other species of reptiles inhabit the swamp, including 36 species of snakes and 14 species of turtles. From the large great blue heron to the small prothonotary warbler, the refuge is also home to over 200 species of birds. One of the most common is the white ibis.
Ibis are historically the most abundant wading bird in Okefenokee. I mean, you definitely see them increase and decrease in response to environmental conditions. We are seeing a lot of them again, although they took a hit several years ago during a very prolonged drought period.
Another great bird of the swamp is the impressive sandhill crane.
We are an important habitat for the sandhill cranes, and within the swamp, the really critical habitat for them are the prairies. They're not found in the forested areas of the swamp. Sandhills can't sit in a tree. They don't have the ability to close their foot around a tree branch the way herons and egrets and ibises do. I believe the estimate of the refuge's current population of Florida sandhill cranes, resident birds that don't migrate, is a couple 300. During the winter months, starting around Thanksgiving and they leave around Valentine's, greater sandhill cranes, which look just like the resident birds, but they come in huge groups. The prairies are full of cranes during the winter, and we do have some visitors who come here during the winter months specifically to see the cranes.
Like the sandhill crane, the distinctive wood stork can often be seen foraging in the swamp. Populations of these birds, North America's only native stork, declined throughout the 20th century due to habitat loss. Wood storks find the shallow peat bogs of the Okefenokee to be perfect feeding grounds.
Wood storks, we're getting a lot of young birds in here in the late summer and fall, especially when water conditions are right for them. They're kind of specialized feeders. There's certain water depth that they're looking for because they're foraging on the smaller fishes that are becoming concentrated in drying down pools. They do seem to be on the way up. They're listed as a threatened species, but I think by and large things are looking up for them here in Georgia.
As the dark water of the Okefenokee leaves the west side of the swamp, the Suwannee River is formed, carrying these black waters all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. A good place to get acquainted with the river is the Suwannee River Nature Center, located just outside the Okefenokee in the small town of Fargo.
The Suwannee River Visitor Center is a very unique building. The center is an opportunity for people to see the displays and interpret not only the wildlife but also the timber industry and some of the folklore of the area. So it not only interprets a bit about Fargo, the people, the culture, and of course the river itself. Suwannee River Visitor Center is built right on the banks of the Suwannee River, and the water level of the Suwannee River can vary greatly. And at times we have had such high water that we couldn't get into the building. But the building is on 17-foot stilts. So even in our highest water that we've experienced, the building was fine, but we couldn't get into the building because all the surrounding area was flooded.
Adjacent to the Visitor Center, the scenic sandy shores of the Suwannee wind through the wilderness of South Georgia toward the Florida line. The billowing trunks of cypress trees line the banks of the river. Known for their distinctive wide trunks and drooping branches, pond and bald cypress can be found throughout the Suwannee River watershed. About an hour's drive west of the Okefenokee, the shallow waters of Banks Lake provide fantastic scenery.
This is a huge wetland complex that includes Banks Lake and the nearby Grand Bay marsh area, both of which drain down and go into the Suwannee River, and then the Suwannee, of course, dumps into the Gulf of Mexico. This marsh here is one of the last pristine black water communities that we have both state and federal control of.
This expansive wetland is part of an ancient geologic formation called a Carolina Bay, or Pocosin.
Carolina Bay and Pocosins are small pothole-type features that were washed out when the oceans were up over this area eons ago, Pleistocene era. The Atlantic Ocean, the beachfront for the Atlantic Ocean was down around Valdosta, which was kind of south of here. And the tidal action of the ocean at that time is what created the nearby Okefenoke Swamp, which in some scientists' characterization is nothing but a huge Carolina Bay.
Historically, Banks Lake served another purpose.
A lot of people know it as an old mill pond. Originally in the 1800s, they established a small dam across the outlet of Banks Lake and put a grist mill right here. That's really what put Banks Lake on the map.
Saved from development in the late 1970s, Banks Lake was designated a National Wildlife Refuge in 1985, managed by the same staff which oversees the Okefenokee. Today, the refuge attracts around 20,000 visitors a year.
At Banks Lake here, there are quite a few recreational opportunities for the public. The place is probably most well known for its fishing. People come here to fish for largemouth bass, crappie and bluegill and catfish and chain pickerel and what have you. But there are equally good opportunities for wildlife observation, either from a boat or a kayak or a canoe. Our concessionaire rents kayaks and canoes here that people can go out. And then there's ample opportunities for photography here. This Poquoson area has some really pristine looking habitat and some of the prettiest sunsets that you can get in this part of the state.
About 40 miles west of Banks Lake, Reedingham State Park is located along the far western side of the Suwannee River watershed.
The park is located on Little River. It's a very small river. It's a relatively short river. We have a man-made dam here that's one of the main attractions of the park.
The stretch of river around Reedingham State Park attracts thousands of vultures every year, and it's become a major tourist attraction. Visitors come from across the country to witness the congregations of black vultures and turkey vultures, which make the park a temporary home in the wintertime.
The vultures have been coming here for as long as anyone can remember. They've always been here, so it's just generation after generation returning. And I think what attracts them to this area is they do like the tall trees along the river. It's a good water source, obviously. And Reedingham hasn't changed. The area is protected, so it changes very little. Of the current, the course of the river may change slightly, but other than that, the area hasn't changed at all.
The river also attracts a number of wading birds and other species, like this rarely seen limpkin, dining on freshwater mussels along the riverbank. In order to make sure the river remains pristine, Reedingham invites volunteers to participate in Rivers Alive, a statewide river cleanup that happens every year in Georgia. This group is from a local 4-H club.
Today we're cleaning up and making other kids aware of the importance of cleaning up a river, and we're just cleaning up the river, helping out Reedingham.
We went to the landing, got on canoes, had a little fun out there cleaning up.
Oh, it's wet. I'm so like...
We only have one earth, and we need to take care of it, and good stewardship of our earth is very important. It's part of all 4-H programs, and especially in a rural area, even around here, sometimes I think we take it for granted. Those are the forests and the rivers, and they're always going to be there, and I don't think we're as aware that there is a lot of pollution going on, even in such rural areas as South Georgia. This is a good project because they see the effects that garbage and trash can have on our waterways.
The group is finding all sorts of trash in the river.
We've found a lot of things like cups, cans, anything from boxes, fishing line, corks.
Well, we found a beach ball. We found the front to a jet ski and a motor oil container.
Beer bottles, Coke cans, plastic objects.
Volunteering for trash cleanups like this one not only helps clean the river, it helps keep the entire watershed healthy. It's important to remember that we all live in a watershed, and what we put into our rivers and streams can have an effect on water systems far beyond our homes.
Water quality is an important part of a healthy ecosystem. Here are some of the things that you can do to help keep the streams and rivers near you clean. Correctly dispose of hazardous household chemicals. Better than that, buy non-toxic household products when possible. Recycle and dispose of trash properly, and never flush non-biodegradable materials down the toilet. Conserve water and avoid overwatering your lawn and garden. Use natural fertilizers on your lawn and decrease hard surfaces around your home. This will improve drainage. Recycle used motor oil. Avoid putting it down gutters or down storm drains. Be an activist. Contact your local public officials or attend public meetings to know more about the laws that protect our water.
Though the headwaters of the Suwannee River are in Georgia, the majority of the river itself and half of the watershed it drains stretches across the Florida Panhandle. The river winds for almost 266 miles through swamps, high limestone banks, and hammocks of hardwood before reaching its final destination in the salt marshes of the Gulf Coast. The Suwannee is a federally designated wild river, one of the only major waterways in the southeastern United States that is still unspoiled by damming and development. A great way to experience this pristine river is by paddle, and in Florida, the Suwannee River Wilderness Trail is a canoe trail that stretches all the way to the river's end.
The Wilderness Trail concept was to provide an overnight stopover along the river every 10 river miles, starting at White Springs, Florida, and ending at the Gulf of Mexico.
The trail begins here at Florida's Stephen C. Foster State Park, which, like Georgia's park, is named for the composer that made the river famous.
If you come to White Springs and come to the trailhead here, launch on the Suwannee River, you paddle downriver, and the first thing you do, you come to a river camp 10 miles down. It's called Woods Ferry River Camp. We have men and women's restrooms with hot water showers. We have a foul weather shelter that doubles as a picnic shelter. We have sleeping platforms at every river camp. We have 5 sleeping platforms. Basically a wooden deck with screen sides, a roof over it, a ceiling fan, and a light. The concept of the river camps also was that it was not to be a day use area. You can only have access to the river camp if you're paddling on the river, if you're hiking along the river, or biking. So the idea is to provide a venue for people who are paddling the river to enjoy the beautiful Suwannee River.
The Wilderness Trail passes through several of Florida's state parks. The first is named for the river itself, Suwannee River State Park, near Live Oak, Florida, about 40 miles from the Georgia state line.
Here at Suwannee River State Park, visitors canoe in. They have access to our boat ramp. Overnight lodging includes 5 new cabins, full-service campground, lots of historic areas in the park for people to explore, a beautiful trail system that is very popular. The park is located at the confluence of the Suwannee River and the Withlacoochee River, and we have over 5 miles of shoreline within the park.
Along this portion of the river, the Suwannee is surrounded by tall banks of limestone. Limestone is a porous rock capable of cracking and dissolving in water. Along the Suwannee River, the landscape is dotted with sinkholes created when underground limestone erodes and collapses. Suwannee River State Park contains a good example of a lime sink.
Lime sink area here is quite a beautiful area. You can see the limestone outcroppings, and it's actually runs through down to the Suwannee River. Our trail system crosses this area.
Sinkholes like this help recharge pockets of underground water called aquifers. While sinkholes take in water and replenish the aquifers, springs release water into the river. Below Suwannee River State Park, the river begins to transition into a more spring-fed environment.
The middle part of the river we typically call spring country, and the locals really enjoy being on the river in the summertime, and they do what we call spring hopping. They will go from one spring to the other and swim and picnic and that sort of thing, meet their families there. So it's a beautiful part of the river, but it's wider and not quite as a wilderness look as we have in the upper river.
Several state parks in Florida are built around these springs. One of the most popular is Manatee Springs State Park near Chiefland, Florida.
Manatee Springs gets about 130 to 140,000 visitors a year. In the spring, we have swimming outside the swimming area. People can go canoeing and kayaking down the spring run and up and down the Suwannee River. We've got open water scuba diving and cave diving for certified registered people only, of course.
Manatee Springs releases an average of 65 million gallons of water into the Suwannee River each day.
Suwannee River is truly a river of springs. Besides originating in the Okefenoke Swamp as it meanders for its 230 miles or so, it's fed by, I think the latest figure is about 300 different springs. Some of them are inside the riverbanks itself, some of them are remote.
The final stop along the Suwannee River Wilderness Trail is here, the Lower Suwannee National Wildlife Refuge. The Suwannee ends as it begins, in a landscape protected to remain intact.
The Lower Suwannee National Wildlife Refuge is about 53,000 acres. It's equally split on either side of the Suwannee River, the Lower Suwannee. So that's how we got our name. We have uplands, sand dunes from ancient beaches. We have bottomland hardwoods, which are all along the Suwannee. There are swamps in the area, as well as some salt marshes that all the fishermen seem to like.
Here at the refuge, you'll find salt marshes not unlike those on the Georgia coast, with a wide assortment of wildlife. From wading birds scouring the marsh mud for food, to fiddler crabs enacting the same mating dances as the fiddlers of coastal Georgia. The Suwannee River watershed is a complex, interconnected system of water sharing that doesn't end at the state line. As the sun sets on the mouth of the Suwannee, black water from the distant Okefenokee mixes with the salty Gulf waters, hundreds of miles from where it began, along the cypress-lined creeks of South Georgia.
Funding for Georgia Outdoors has been made possible by a grant from Mary Hall Singleton and by the Imlay Foundation.